getting all that Lincoln stuff in for how the tuition rates are set. And was able to really kind of do an analysis that wasn't really possible to do, certainly in the fall. And what I'm seeing is some things that are burning hot and some things that are burning cold, if you will. So that, but I'll point out what these are. One, we know that in the change to a new principal, we saw there was no insurance, there was a family insurance. That was a big chunk. We saw a new wage and benefit CBA for the support staff that was more generous than the budget actually allowed. We also saw that we got hit hard with the IVF and that we got, and that what I've just done some more research to try to figure out what's happening is we have a high burn rate on special ed secondary tuition that will see that line by the time we get to the end of the year be $20,000 over. So we have a few areas where we're really adding up a lot of money that we didn't anticipate spending. However, haven't touched the legal. We had a savings on and that's $10,000. We didn't touch the ESY, the extended school year stuff. We didn't touch the summer school salaries. And then when we had a younger teacher replace a more experienced teacher, we saved a bunch of money there. So we have some lines that are saving us from what otherwise would have been a really, kind of tumultuous, kind of going off a cliff with spending. When I look at the whole thing and I try to do some analysis, I know that what we're coming up against is that even though it feels like winter might be coming to an end, we're just getting those heating bills, et cetera, that, for last month, et cetera, and that we'll continue to get those all the way through the rest of the school year, really, and that we're going to get we'll get mowing and grounds things that come in the spring, and there'll be a flurry of other activities with most things that are in the burns, in the other instruction area. But there are things that will pick up again in the spring and that we'll see continued expenses. I feel everything is from what I can tell in the analysis I can do, everything is pretty much right where we want it to be, with this sense of we can't let anything else slip. We can't have anything more like the secondary tuition go hotter than we thought. We can't get another surprise like the IVF. We can't have, some of these things that have been hitting us hard come at us without significant problems that would come to ending the year, where we want to end it. We have been budgeting really tight the last few years, so there's no fluff in this budget. There's no extra money that if something happens, well, we'll just grab this or that. So obviously we do this anyway, no matter what. We try to do this analysis and get ready for, the end of the year and make sure we're on track and all that. But you have a decision to make in your budget on how you leverage the $100,000 that was put into the budget in case it was needed this year for SPED. And you have the opportunity to roll that forward as revenue. And that's a decision that you'll need to make in the second part of this, finance stuff when we start looking at the budget. And you have a decision to make on whether or not you want to roll it all forward or potentially hang on to a bit of that for what you have happening right now this year. I mean, you do have $20,000 more in special ed secondary expenses than you budgeted. And I just want to give you that word of caution. So as we look at the finances, I feel like we can make it to the end of the year okay. As your finance person, I would hang on to some piece of that reserve to make sure that you get through this the end of this year. But that's a decision you can all make together. If you roll the whole $100,000 forward into revenue for next year, and we get really tight, you have nothing else to grab. You have nothing else. There's nothing else in your budget you have almost maybe $10,000 of undesignated balance left over from a couple of years ago in your account, and you have no other contingencies. We've burned through the secondary contingency with the IVF stuff. There's nothing else here. So at this point, February 3rd, you got to make it to June 30th. If you put everything forward into your budget, you're on a, well, I just did those toboggan races and it will feel like that to me. Kind of, coming down the chute, pretty icy at 37 miles an hour, but no one got hurt. So that's my sort of honest assessment as you move into look at what you want to do with that 100,000, you might hold 25 of it in case you need it this year.
Is the secondary tuition line secondary sped public tuition?
It might be named that. We've still been cleaning up the after fund names.
No, I know.
It was budgeted at
but I just want
86.
to make sure that, 84,
Yep.
85, pretty
And we
much,
spent 60 something of that.
68.
And my calculations from going over it with the secondary team today and special ed team is that we're going to spend another 40 easy. The way it was explained to me is that it started with 4 students, got up to 7.5, and is now down to 5.5. So we had a higher than anticipated number of students that were identified as special ed.
Yep.
I also worry, I don't know what grade they're in, and I worry that because I had the same data. That was a surprise to me. So I went back because I was asked, before I did my analysis, I said, how many special ed students do we have in South Bristol this year and next? I said 4 this year, 4 next year, I was told by special ed. And then I went through here, I was like, there's more than 4 here. Oh, well, there were 7.5 for a couple months, but now we're down to 5.5. And so I just am concerned. The ability to identify the number in each town is, I learned, trickier than Lincoln doesn't invoice. It isn't just one number. It isn't like the students, the secondary regular ed, where you have a certain number of students. It's more dynamic month to month. And
we see it month to month, though.
We see it month to month, but it changes month to month.
Yeah, no, I know we just lost.
And so I'm just being cautious here because you wouldn't want me to be anything but.
No, not at all. And now you have me worried about our projections for next year.
Yeah.
So, theoretically, when we project for next year, we're taking the kids that aren't seniors and we're taking the kids that are in 8th grade, or we're making a projection based on that knowledge.
Correct. But if someone is identified in special ed for sort of, October, November, December, or not for January, we don't get them in our budget for the next year, but they could come back in pretty
No, I
easy.
know.
That's the problem.
That's
what I mean. And we just don't, with the way we do it, there's no special ed secondary contingency, and there just isn't that kind of extra money in the budget. If you were a much larger school with 2 or 3 times as many staff, you'd have these unfilled positions and things like that just leave chunks of change that you can grab. But when you're the efficiency of your model leaves very room for that kind of extra money.
So the last line on the first page, tuition to private schools, it makes me nervous that is encumbered and ends up being 0, because nothing ever comes out to 0 like that.
Well, I did that on purpose because then I took it out of the contingency, but left 2,690 in the contingency. So I used all the tuition.
So that's a solid number.
Yes, but look at your insured value is 30,162 over.
And so that's a combination of things, right? Because obviously we didn't predict for 4% increase in the IBF for this year, but that number doesn't equate to 30,000. So is it also just because the MAT went up? I mean, the MAT went up a little bit more than we projected, right? So that the original 6% IBF also went up? Because our bill to Lincoln wasn't 30,000 for the increased IBF.
Oh, I haven't received it yet. Well, we're getting that each month. We don't get one bill for the IVF. We get monthly bills.
Right, but we did get one bill for the increase in IBF from September to December.
We got a bill for the whole adjustment that was both the tuition and the IVF for the 4 months. But now the January bill will just be at the whole rate. February bill will be at the whole rate.
So that's what the 30,000 is.
What's that? Yeah, because I have identified, calculated that out over the rest of the year, assuming all our enrollment stays the same.
Okay. All right.
So going over 20 grand in special ed is a projection, or it's where we're at now?
It's their current burn rate. Then it's when I asked, sort of how many students, we went from 4 to 7.5 to 5.5, and I've projected 5.5 for the rest of the year. It could go up or down, but I'm projecting it to stay the same as it is right now through the rest of the year. And that will be an additional 35,000 on top of this number here, which would get us to be 40 over budget for the year in that line. Or no, at 20 over budget. There's that line. Yeah. 20 over, 40 more, 20 over.
Okay, so, before we go back and talk about the sped contingency, are there other questions in this budget? Or not the budget, the monthly summary.
The one thing that I don't have, let's see if I can do this for you in the future. We used to be able to do it in Pro Fund. I can't do it yet in After Fund, but you can't see my budget revisions. So for example, we had the $100,000 facilities contingency as a line, but then when we needed to expend it, we moved it to building maintenance services. But I don't, unlike Pro Fund, this doesn't show me a budget revision column for you to see that I did that. So we'll look and see if we can get After Fund to help us with that. But you'll notice building maintenance services now is now 160, and the contingency is just what is it? Should be 5,000. And so
Adds up about.
yeah, so we moved that. It was 110, and it was 60 below. We moved 100 down so that we could clear all those invoices and continue to do the purchase orders in there that we need to be able to do. But I know that, and Laurie knows that because we talked about it, and Katie knows that, but you can't see that in this document.
What about our food service for this year?
What's that?
Our food service for this year, is that 25 or is that gonna be 35?
I'll have to run that separately. I'll have to run the 2930. That's another piece of the budget that's outside of this that we usually do at the end of the year.
Okay.
But I can try to advance that, and we can do it sort of probably do it in March, at the end of 3 quarters, try to do it and then project for the end.
So I just know there's a big difference between 25 this year and budgeting for 35
Mhm.
next year, so that might be, even if it's half of that difference, it might. still
Right, that we may
affect
do
us.
next year entirely different as well, and, see how that turns out. We're looking into that right now.
And I know that there's always a lot of, there's continually talk about how tight we run our budgets, but I think that there was also some misassigning of salaries in this building last year, so I don't think we accounted correctly for exactly who was in the building. So it's not just the budget committee or the school board running an incredibly tight budget. It's also some things that we've now identified and cleaned up that contribute to us being very tight at the end of the year.
And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with being really tight. You
make it sound like it, Peter, every year.
I make it sound like it?
Yeah, because you were saying we don't have any money to move anything around, so
Well, what
it
happens-
does feel like that. I mean,
Well,
that's
the-
why I'm mentioning it. 'Cause-
So then what the mechanisms that you have, that you would have to rely on if you went over is to start working. And you said that this would be possible, is that you then go to the select board and you say that we need some additional funds. I'm trying to prevent that from happening, but if you had to do that, I think you've all identified that you'd like to run a tight budget. And then if you need more money because something happens in special ed or something, you have mechanisms to do that. In an RSU, you'd be forced to build reserves because you wouldn't have those mechanisms. So I'm trying to kind of watch this and say, where do you want the line to be? Do you want these tools to be within your own control, or do you want to leave them in the municipal control?
No, I mean, I think we want as much but I will speak just for myself, we want as much in our control as possible, but we also, I think the idea of having some sort of carry forward is something that we are also very interested in, because up until last year, we always had a fairly healthy carry forward. I know that you budget for exactly the expenses that you have, but I think most schools have some sort of carry forward at the end of the year. And those do help with little adjustments in special ed. And I'm not talking about padding the budget so we can have this big carry forward. I just have never run into a year where we haven't had a carry forward.
The schools that we have that have carry forwards almost 100% of the time have a significant number of unfilled positions, both by the fact that they can't fill them, also because they choose not to fill them because they say, okay, I want to budget for that in case we can need it, but we may not need it. And that's, that is happening. There are schools who have carried positions that they just have never filled because they just haven't needed to activate that. And they keep a few things in there to be able to manage this kind of thing. And you don't, I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just saying that there's a big difference in how some other towns budget. And they kind of, but you're not going to have a carry forward unless you plan that carry forward.
Well, I think with our contingencies, with our summer school, there are lines that summer school is a prime example. The last 2 years, we have grant funded summer school. We still put a little bit of money in the budget for summer school because if we don't go to get those grants, we know we want to take care of our kids and prevent potential learning loss and provide them minimal opportunities in the summer to be at school. We've had carry forwards 9 out of the 10 years I've been here. We haven't had unfilled positions. So it's just a change that is taking a little bit for me to get used to, I guess.
Well, just look at this current year. If you hadn't changed principals, you'd have 30,000 less in insurance. If you hadn't,
Okay, I understand that.
if you hadn't had the IVF thing, if you hadn't had the extra kids in special ed, you'd have some carryover.
Yeah.
But you've had these circumstances, and these are the circumstances that, to a certain extent, you can expect some of them. There are all the unknowns, and you have to plan for you have to do that risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, when these things happen, if we've been funding some years the secondary contingency lower than other years and things like that. And I would just caution you not to underfund those contingencies and to create, like your legal lines, great to have 10,000 there. Look for those lines to be opportunities to have a carryover as much as anything else.
Well, I think this year we put 2 contingencies in the budget for our high school students because we knew we didn't have 3 kids at Bath. So, we actually allowed for the same amount of money last year that we did this year, even though the number of contingencies looks different. It's still planning for 2 contingencies. It was just one was because we knew we had 3 kids at Bath and we could take that money. And this year we know we only have 1 at that, so we couldn't do that. So
I think we all build our checkbooks, on the bills that we know are coming in, right? And we all have savings accounts for the bills that we don't expect, right? And for the rainy day things. And that's what we haven't done, is built those, or let's put it a different way. We've built the savings accounts for the rainy day, but we've had to use them because we've had all these expenses.
But we also haven't accurately projected for the bills that we know are coming in. And that's my main point here, is that this year we have accurately projected for the bills that we know are coming in the FY26 budget. I stand behind that 110%. I've seen Peter and Lori and lots of other people in this room work really hard to match the expenses in this building with what's in that document. In the last 2 years, that hasn't been happening as much. So I don't think I understand what you're saying, but the reason why we didn't have carry forward last year and potentially this year is not because it's because we knew what bills were coming in, but we didn't plan for them correctly sometimes. So I understand your analogy, but I have a little bit of an issue with it because we knew some things that weren't accurately reflected in the budget last year. We've changed it, we've learned from it, and can stand behind this budget 110%. So I think that things have changed in response to where we were, but it's not just because we're tightening the purse strings all the time.
Yeah.
So now we have to figure out what we want to do with the special ed contingency. It seems like maybe saving $25,000 to offset the special ed secondary costs that we didn't expect might be the way to go, and then to put 75,000 in the budget? Are there thoughts or other ideas about how we should do that?
Yeah, I mean, our financial advisor's sitting here telling us we should hold on to some of it.
If
So
there's
I
20 of it that would over, so the question is just what's the number, I guess?
think 25,
25, yeah.
25.
At least I think if that's what we're gonna have to spend.
Are there any other,
He said
Peter, what do
definitely
you
20.
think? Do you think 25 or do you think 50? Am I allowed to talk?
I would say definitely would hang on to 25 for this year. And it would be entirely responsible to put 75 into your fund balance rolling forward.
Mhm.
You could also choose to be a little bit cautious and put only 50 into the fund balance forward in case you end up in a situation next year where you want to spend 25. Because I can't tell you what's going to happen in the secondary spend. Nobody can tell you what's going to happen in secondary spend next year.
and that could just, I mean, theoretically, it could actually just go to the same place
Mhm.
that it
Mhm.
would if we put 75 in our,
Well, if you roll 75 forward,
right,
you're
you
going to
can't
have
take it back.
25,000 less in taxes being paid.
Right, yeah, yeah, no, I think 50 is probably,
I like 50
Yeah.
personally, just because
we can move
I didn't
25
plan
over
this
next year.
budget. And so I can't say exactly what's going to happen, but I want it to not be awful.
yeah.
Mm.
Because
So
we can still spend that
I guess
25.
where
Yeah.
I'm breaking down where I'm confused is what you're saying is that for purposes of budgeting for next year, you're thinking take 50 grand from this year that we won't spend.
Yes, and roll that into your revenue because you have a big increase and you have you try and do everything you can to keep your mill rate down. So use 50,000 out of that sped reserve, but don't use the whole 100 that you have because you may well need 25 this year. You may well need 25 next year because you just don't know. So take 50 out of the savings and put it in the checking for next year. And then you have some for each of both this year to kind of balance out any sped situations, which is what it was intended for, which is what the warrant article that raised that 100,000 said, to be used for special ed. And you didn't have the full need that you anticipated that you might this year, so you can ease off that a bit to mitigate your mill rate increase. Because I know that's a need, that's something that the town wants to, that everybody in this community wants to do.
Mhm.
If you weren't concerned about that, you just keep it in the reserve for years to come.
Mhm.
But the town has other reserves, there's other ways, there's other levers that you have to deal with that. So why not keep it down another year instead of letting it go up and give all the people who live here a little bit of a break on what the impact is
Sure.
and kind of roll with it a little bit.
But we're also not adding anything to that contingency fund for future years.
You're not at this point. And that's where we run into everything you said about the checking account was exactly right on the savings account. And it's partly because you're not the whole household. You have the rest of the town and what the select board are doing with the way they're managing their funds to kind of lean on. Okay. So if you were an independent RSU, you wouldn't have that. You would have no choice but to keep adding to your reserves and because you're going to need those. But you have, a larger partner here, or, you have the rest of the town, and it's looking at how it can manage the municipal budget and the funds that it has access to. So you're in a unique situation. So you can be a little less cautious about the reserves, but what we're doing here is still saying you're going to have 50,000 in a special ed reserve, which is better than you were 15 months ago, and then you can, watch the years. And if you get into a point where, if you have a year where there's, you don't have the facilities needs or you don't have I think what you want to watch is for your any kind of dip in secondary enrollment that you ever experience, you use that as an opportunity to see that go down. You keep, kind of a level budget impact and you fill up your reserves, so watch for those opportunities. They're going to be few from what I see in your enrollment, but I think there is one coming up in a few years.
Mhm.
Capitalize on that, save up some money and watch that. But this conversation, should never really end. This is the conversation you want to have with the select board about how to manage these things. And it's the one that you want to decide, what do you want to be able to action without further process. Because what you're doing is you're putting certain funds in the hands of the school committee to deal with things. And there's a certain amount of trust involved in that, a certain amount of just fiscal fiduciary responsibility, that if you put it in special ed, you're not going to just go out and, buy a new special ed wing to the room or whatever, you're going to use it for those things that are necessary, So that's just a level of how much oversight, checks and balances and things like that. But that's the conversation to be had especially when you're making a decision like this. Is it better to hang on to it, or is it better to keep the mill rate as low as possible? So there's all the conversation that you're having today, right now, there's no real right or wrong. I mean, I don't think it would be a good idea to just roll the whole 100,000 into the, revenue. But with the way we're breaking it up, the 50 is judicious. And the awareness, though, is really important, because as people change at this table, as the select board kind of moves on with what it's looking at, everybody needs to know the importance of reserves, the size that's needed, the impact it has, the need to not just think of fund balance forward as kind of windfalls, but planned, and if you're really good at budgeting, you will be really good at making sure you have a fund balance forward. It's not going to be a surprise, So those are the things that I just offer tonight while you're getting ready to pass this budget.
And I think one of the lessons learned, which would have been great to learn 3 weeks ago, would be that having a secondary sped contingency of $10,000 is a very smart move. I mean, we're over 20, but still having just something with, if we have a secondary sped population that can fluctuate so much, it's smart to have that in there, which is why we have the regular tuition. So, not suggesting to add it to this budget at this point, but definitely the FY27 it's worth the discussion. All right, I'll make a motion to, I don't know exactly the wording of this, make a motion to, I don't know what the differentiations are, to keep 25,000 for spending in FY25, to hold on to 25,000 in the contingency fund, and to move 50,000 into the revenue for FY26, something like that.
I think the most succinct way to say it is that I make the motion to expend, to move from the special ed reserve 50,000 as revenue for next year's budget.
Right, and then the rest of it.
And the rest
It
just
there,
stays
so
where
it
it
doesn't
is.
matter. Okay. So that's Peter's, my motion, Peter, making more succinct.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Were you able to catch that?
What?
Were you able to catch the motion?
Yeah, sort of. You'll look at them. I'll send you the notes.
Well, I got as far as to move 50K from sped, and then I kind of.
I got it, yeah.
Okay, anything else under finance report? All right, old business.
Well,
Do
do you want to pass this
We need to
budget?
pass this budget.
I mean, okay, do we need to pass the revenue part of it?
Well, I believe that was the intent, because you have very
The
short
cost
amount of time,
center
you have a week to
No,
get
no,
this.
so here's what I've been confused on, and this will carry over to, well, if we meet on Thursday. So we're voting, the only thing that we haven't voted on is how the revenue side of things looks.
That's not true. The school board hasn't voted to approve this budget yet.
We voted to approve it before it went ahead to, okay. All right, yeah, make a motion to approve the FY26 budget. Yeah, okay.
Can I read out the revenue lines or something? Because the revenue lines
Yes.
are the only change, what we see here. Let me just. So what changes here The local appropriation additional, which is written here, is 1,712,712. 367.17 drops down to 1,662,360.17. And then we have down on that line says move from sped reserve. We have 50,000 there. So those two lines changed in the revenue, but the total revenue is the same.
Try that again.
Yep. For the budget that's in front of everybody tonight, we will reduce the local appropriation additional
Yep.
from 1,712,367.17 to 1,662,367.17, and we will move. We will add $50,000 to the move from sped reserve revenue line,
Okay.
which still gives us the same exact total revenue, but we just do it a little differently.
Yep. Great.
And then with that one budget amendment, the budget that stands before you, I suggest you approve.
All right, make a motion to approve the FY 26 budget.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, can you send a digital copy so I can send that out to the budget committee and the
Yep.
select board? Thank you.
Who seconded the move?
Christian.
This one just now, but who seconded
I
the
think
move?
you did.
Christian.
I think you did.
You
Yep.
both?
Yep.
Yeah, man, I'm on it.
All right,
Thank you.
old business, school board meeting dates.
No, that's
Nothing
just-
has changed.
Nothing's
right?
changed. I think yours stayed pretty much the same, if I'm not mistaken. But that's just through December of next year. This is the alignment where I now have, moving forward, I now have a board meeting every Tuesday night. They just spread the 4 towns out over the month.
And we won't be meeting in July.
And July,
Yep.
Sarah and I spoke, it's uncommon to meet in July. If you do, it's probably an issue we're addressing.
Right, you sometimes we have a special meeting if something needs our attention, but,
Or you're approving a new hire.
Oh,
new business, none, policy, none. Long-range planning, standby. Sure.
Can I ask a question about long-range planning? Doesn't have to be very long range, but are you expecting any turnover this year?
Wait,
Teachers?
Yeah, I'm asking.
No.
No, okay.
okay.
Just curious.
You have all the information these days, Christian, so give it to me. No, we're looking good.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Without objection, the board chair adjourns this meeting at 6.
Did you want to?
What else do I want to do? I'm sorry.
Did you want to go into the executive session for labor?
Oh, yeah, we do.
Negotiations?
All right, so we are, okay, I'm going to call an executive session, the 1 MSRA 40560 labor contract negotiations. I'll make the motion. Is there a second?
second.
Any vote to go in?
Contract negotiations.
We are in at 6:38, and we will not be doing any business after we adjourn from here. Thank you.
Sure, this is a good one.